Welcome back. The Local Initiative Support Corporation, better known as LISC NYC, supports local organizations advancing equitable development of historically underinvested neighborhoods. Now, as the city's affordable housing project pipeline grows and more market opportunities arise, LISC NYC is launching an initiative to expand the capacity of minority-owned business enterprises as well as developers and helping them to compete for more market share within the industry. And joining us now to share more is the executive director of LISC NYC, Valerie White. And Valerie, glad to have you.
Thank you, Daren. Glad to be back on BronxNet.
Yeah, and so for us, as we talk about this here, I mean, we look around and we do see a lot of growth in terms of housing and this whole marketing environment. I know that your organization is going front and center at really providing some much needed resources.
Yes, absolutely. What we've seen historically in the development of New York City, the rebuilding of communities or even the building of new communities, is that developers of color, in particular Black developers, are not having access to those opportunities to build the communities or do rehabilitation in the communities that look like them, right? Where the population looks like them. So there's something about the cultural integrity of having developers of color working, building communities, community infrastructure, affordable housing in those neighborhoods. So what we're doing is working to establish and partner with opportunities through training, access to capital, and partnership with government agencies are being made to this cadre of developers.
So there is a training program that's actually on site for developers to be able to get this?
Yes, absolutely. So the LISC New York City's Developers of Color program was launched a week ago. We have a cohort of 12 developers. These are mid-level developers of color who have done a few projects, developed maybe a couple of hundred units, but based on our survey and analysis of the market, could utilize some capacity building and some specific skills that will make them more competitive for government contracts, particularly, but also other, nonprofit or private contract opportunities. So we've very carefully curated a curriculum which was developed and designed by Columbia University to provide these developers with those skill sets. We'll be matching that with our credit enhancement fund, which will also give access to capital to these developers who will be going through this 2.5-month program, and then, matching them with opportunities in the end for development projects within the various communities across New York.
Can you give me a little bit more in regards to understanding what's going on in that area of development? Because we do know that when we see development going on across New York City, minorities are not well represented at all. And just that word, minority, and we can really put just a small m right there because we don't see it out there. And there are some challenges to those who really are trying to get into this, into the environment of having contracts across. So what are some of the areas where, the minorities are falling short in terms of being ready for these contracts when they become available?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily start with the minorities falling short, because that's kind of for lack of a better word, the reasoning that the majority population has given for not having, an equitable share of minorities in these contracting opportunities. Of course, we're looking at inequities that are systemic. And so we want to be sure that we're identifying these barriers, removing them so that the opportunities are equitable. So some of it has to do, yes, it may have to do with capacity, but capacity comes from experience and opportunity. So it's almost cyclical. If there's not an opportunity to perform on a project, you don't build that capacity to take on, in particular, the larger jobs. And it's the larger jobs that bring that sustainable wealth generation and help those development companies grow. So we wanted to be sure that we identified that by pre-surveying the government agencies that provide contracts, as well as private institutions, private corporations, financial institutions, then taking that information to curate this very specially customized curriculum to address those gaps. But all that is fine. You could train all you want, but if there's not the capital there available for developers to be able to utilize that capital to perform on jobs, then it's, you know, training without the other part of the opportunity. And that's the part where we don't necessarily say that they're falling short, but we're looking to ensure that they have equal access to capital, working capital, in order for their company to be able to perform on deliverables. So we work very closely to put those two things together.
Well, Valerie, thank you for the clarification there, and that's definitely worth noting. Now, I want to talk a little bit about this because when we talk about contracts, we hear in the clause MWBE utilization. That means minority, women, business. You know, they have the opportunity to experience equity in terms of contracts, but that's not always the case either. But for somebody who may not be so familiar with MWBE utilization, can you first give our viewers a little bit of an education as to what that means?
Yes, well, under New York State law and also New York City law, there it's Article 15A, New York State Executive Law, Article 15A in the state. There is a goal for state government contracts to look to identify 30% of minority and women businesses to participate in the procurement opportunities in New York State. And they need to be certified. So there's an actual division in New York State that goes through and certifies MWBEs, and that's for any state contracting. So it's anything from, you know, developers building bridges and homes to actually purchasing paper clips, right? The state and the city spend a great deal of money on procurement to operate and meet their mission as municipal entities. So the 30% basically is the result of a complex disparity study looking at the available minority companies, matching that with the amount of procurement that each entity spends on a variety of state contracts, and then determining that 30% generally meets it. So that's the goal. Of course, it's a constitutional program, so there's always constitutional challenges, but that's what the goal is. We submit at LISC New York City that there needs to be, preparation and more integration to ensure that that goal is actually met, not just through sub-consultants, which is often the case on a larger contract, but actually building up the minority companies so that they can be the prime contractor themselves and not have to rely on tacking on to someone else's contract going forward. So that's the type of programming that we are instituting and the partnerships that we are involved in at LISC.
Yeah, and so you got this partnership with the New York State Dormitory Authority, and I know you're doing some work there, so more on that.
Yes, and that's the precise type of public-private partnership that would help push forward the, utilizing the goal to grow strength and wealth within developers of color or contractors. So this is a $10 million liquidity agreement with LISC through its Black Economic Development Fund in the strategic investments area of LISC National, with the dormitory DASNY, Dormitory Authority of the State of New York. And basically, DASNY will be contracting with certified MWBEs to be prime contractors on some of the larger construction deals that they are pursuing. And as we know, DASNY, they don't only produce or build dorms, but it's also hospitals and affordable housing and other community infrastructure. So these contractors will have the opportunity to have access to liquidity or working capital so that they can actually complete the deliverables under the contract. Of course, we know that when you are a state contractor, before you get paid, you have to finish the job. So how can you do that if you're waiting to get paid? So this allows these contractors access to working capital, and they will utilize that working capital to complete portions of the job. And then when they get paid back on the invoice from DASNY, they will use a portion of that money to repay back the liquidity agreement. We are also, through this partnership, public-private, working with the Jaime Group, which is a Black-owned surety and insurance broker. And this group will be ensuring that the contractors get the appropriate surety bond so that they can qualify for the DASNY job. But the Jaime Group will actually act as the escrow, ensuring that all the money gets spent appropriately and the liquidity agreement gets paid back. So it's a wonderful partnership between the three, but it does give the opportunity for minority contractors to be in a position to be prime contractors, and that will grow their wealth, and it'll become a point that they won't even need access to a liquidity agreement to perform on state contracts.
Do you have an idea about the number of minority contractors that we see across New York City?
There are, I can't give an exact number, but there are more than sufficient to meet that 30% goal of emerging developers, as well-established minority developers who it's not necessary for them to go through a capacity workshop like we're having at LISC. That's for the smaller developers who haven't had the opportunity to perform on larger contracts. But there are larger developers of color that, again, still have the same hurdles of access to capital, just simply because of the systemic inequities in terms of capital provision to companies of color.
Yeah, you led into my next question. I want to talk about capital for a moment because we are knowing that, right now, all across America, we've got a supply shortage. And when it comes to the fact of capital, a lot of businesses are really struggling and trying to make it. And when you're a developer and when you're a minority business, access to capital is huge. And we heard about the disparities with the, with PPP loans and things such of that nature. Can you give us a little insight as to some of the challenges that people are facing, given the fact of access to capital, and even when the capital is available through PPP, a lot of businesses still got left behind?
Well, through PPP, yes, a lot of businesses did get left behind. Some businesses benefited from it. But I think the biggest thing with that in terms of the PPP, and this happens in general, is that there isn't always an organizational infrastructure to go through the complex application process. And that was a big issue in PPP, particularly for the smaller minority-owned businesses. But going forward, as we think about the access to capital, as we think about how developers of color can be more of a player in the development and the building of communities, we have to look at, are they having the same access to financial institutions? Are the interest rates the same? Are they being asked to look at different variables that a non-minority developer doesn't have to? And I think that in particular with minority developers, they're beginning to have a little bit more success with the community development financial institutions, or the CDFIs, which LISC is one, where we can think about investing in developers who are Black-owned, minority-owned, Latinx-owned, immigrant-owned, and in a different way than a commercial bank has historically done so. So it's our hope to continue to raise that capital, invest in these type of organizations, and start to build that systemic wealth generation so that they're in a position to compete on a regular basis.
Yeah, we see a lot of development going across New York City. We see a lot of construction going on across New York City, and people could always talk about that while this is going on, it's an opportunity that's out there. Are you optimistic that, given all of this development and construction that we see across the city and also the state, that we'll see more and more minority participation?
I am optimistic on a number of fronts. First, as we start to continue to call attention to the disparities in the provision of capital to minority developers, I think it will give the opportunity for more investment in these type companies. But when you think about it, Daren, as an ecosystem, investing in minority developers means investing in a larger ecosystem. Then you invest in other aspects of the real estate industry, whether it's lawyers, appraisers, whether it's construction firms, contractors, who then in turn generally will employ minorities to actually complete the work. So you have all these other ancillary businesses that come with development that, well, give an opportunity to grow workforce development, grow career opportunities for people of color in this particular space. So that in terms of advancing a real estate, inclusive real estate industry that takes into account all of those elements, that is what we are standing our platform on at LISC and pushing forward that concept. We have a concept paper out there. We are raising funds to support that initiative. We have 10 organizations, public, private, government, supporting this concept, and we'll be working to integrate that together as we move forward. So yes, I'm hopeful, but we have to keep the message out. And so that's why it's so important to have the opportunity to speak on, mediums such as BronxNet. So we thank you for that.
Hey, we love having you, Valerie. We got to get ready to go. But before we do, how can people get in touch to find out more about the work that LISC is doing and how somebody might be able to get connected?
Yes, absolutely. Our website is www.lisc.org/NYC. On our website, there is a listing of all of the programs that we're doing, our commentary, our op-eds, our news media interviews, but also a way to get in contact with us if you are interested in our platform and would like to partner.
All righty. Well, thank you so much, Valerie White, for being with us. And again, happy Thanksgiving to you and glad to have you with us.
Thank you. You as well. Enjoy.
All righty. I want you to stay with us as we continue on this Thanksgiving. We've got more show coming up. And guess what? There's more on the social justice forums. We'll be back with another very special guest in a moment.